So we're going to do a real quick fabrication of this chicken. I'm not going to verbalize too much to you. What I want you to see though is the breaking down and sequencing somewhat of parts. Now, just as a letting you know ahead of time, you may have seen a slightly different way of breaking it down based on what instructor you had, but this is the way that I have done it and I've found works the best for me. So first, we're going to want to take out that wishbone. If you look at your chicken and you stand it up, you of course have your legs and your thighs, your wings, and then into your breast. So if we look on the wing side of things, we have this wishbone that's going to kind of do one of these in here. We want to make sure we take that out first. It makes removing the breast later on much easier. So if I was to show you, the wishbone is right in here and I can feel it with my finger. I can take my boning knife and put it on both sides of those bones. And what you want to do is ride that wishbone all the way through. At that point then, you can pop your fingers through and up and through. And we have our wishbone. At this point, you can clean some of this fat off. And I like to look at this more. We're going to take our airlines off right away. So to take my airlines off, what I'll do is I'm going to de-joint it. And I just do that by, if you lift the bird up, the weight of the bird itself will help you. I'll just come around. And that helps to clean that drumlet or the winglet off for you. And you can actually just, if you pop it with your fingers, thumbs on both sides, break that joint, and you end up with a nice clean bone. Keeps the meat down below with a nice clean bone up top. Do the same thing on the other side. All the way around. Use my thumbs, and that should pop right through for you. Now this is where you might have some variations. I like taking the breast off right away. I think the chicken lays a little bit flatter and it's easier to move around that way. So to do this, I'm going to look for this dark white portion between the leg and the breast. And I just want to gently do that because I want that skin to remain on that chicken breast. Same thing on the other side. And light cuts. If you have a sharp knife, you should barely have to touch it to that skin and have it pull off. So at this point we have our two breasts. You want to ride it along that breastbone. As long as I find that. I can follow that right down. And the meat itself, you can see it's peeling almost off this bone without doing much to it. So this is where the joint is still in here, and we want to pop that joint, and you can just pop it, and then with your knife, find that and separate that out. So what we have is an airline, lots of skin intact, and if you get the tenderloin with it, great. You can always come back and put the tenderloin on and leave it on for the cooking portion of it. It'll help lock in that moisture, as well as it's a nice piece of meat that you want to make sure you're giving them. Looking at this though, we want to look at the skin. So, you know, is there straggling skin on this that's, you know, outside of what's covering the breast meat itself? And so we want to clean that up a little bit. I always like to look at this too. In this case, it's not too bad, but is there an area where it's really thick on the fat? And if that's the case, you can always kind of come back here and with your knife, drag some of that excess of fat off. It'll just help in the rendering process all around. I'll take the breast off the other side as well. Find that joint. I like to pop the joint as soon as I can. It just kind of gives you the heads up as to where that knife needs to go in between that joint. Cut through that skin. Again, you want to just look at that skin and is it laying over that breast meat nicely, or do you need to trim it up a little bit? We have some access here, so you can see this fat is not going to render out in the cooking process, so we want to make sure that we take that off. Otherwise, your guest will be left with a big hunk of fat that isn't able to render off and crisp up, and it just doesn't look nice. It's not appealing to eat, so we want to make sure we remove that. So at this point, you can see the carcass where the breast and the wing meat was is now removed. And what we want to do is we want to actually flip this bird over now, and we want to be able to take the leg and thigh off. We want to make sure that we get the oyster meat. So if we look here, we have a good chunk of meat in here, and although you might be thinking it's not a lot now, if you were breaking down 50 chickens, you know, if you're looking at an ounce a piece on each bird, you're looking at 50 ounces of potentially wasted meat. So we want to make sure we get those off. What I'll do is I take my knife and I'll go down and I'll split it. And I'll kind of make a cross. So I want to go right above where that oyster's at, across. And with my thumbs now, I can actually pop my thumb under so there's a bone here, and then I'll pop it under that oyster meat. And then kind of pull it off of where that was hanging in there. Do the same thing on the other side. And if you can actually feel where that thigh attaches into that carcass, what you can do is with your thumbs you can actually pop that joint again out. At that point then you can see how much easier it's going to come off here. So I put my knife down and I can just pull it right off of that carcass. Same thing on the other side. Might have to make a small cut just to loosen that up. It pulls right off. When it does that, you're not losing any of the meat that was left down there. So this can get split down and go into stock. One thing you want to do, make sure of, is you want to try and remove as much of that skin on there. The skin contains a lot of fat, and leaving a lot of that on there will make for a fatty chicken stock. So you want to make sure we get that off. And then what we're left with, we're looking at our leg and thigh here. You can kind of do the same thing we did before with the wing. So I like to take this just one step further, and I'll go around. And it just makes eating the leg meat much nicer. And if you give me a second, I'll grab a paper towel here. With the paper towel, it comes off real easily. So you want to grab that with a paper towel, and you can just pull that lower portion off. And so you're left with a nice clean bone. to which we'll take a little bit of this cartilage off on the tip, and it helps that bone bleed out. And then to separate our leg and our thigh, if you look here, you can actually kind of feel where it is, but there's going to be a line that we're going to use. We're going to cut some of this off. But there's a line that we're going to use where we're going to go through, and you shouldn't have to really crack through any bones at all. It should go through like butter. So nice and easy, and that separates your thigh bone from where your leg bone had attached to it. So you have our thighs, our leg. We're going to do the same thing on the other side. When you're doing this, you want to try and keep as much meat on that leg as possible, but we want to cut through those tendons, which again makes it a little bit nicer for your customer to eat, and overall presents itself a little bit better. Okay, so we remove that. I'm gonna bring our chef's knife in now. And what we're looking for is there's a soft part of this cartilage that we want to take off. We're not trying to crack any bones, but we take that a little bit off, and now when that bone heats up, if there are any blood remnants in that bone itself, it's gonna move through, and it'll help make where the meat attaches to that bone look like it's more cooked instead of like the blood is hanging on that bone. So we separate our legs, we'll make sure the skin covers up the meat. We have our thighs, our airline breasts. And when I'm looking at my wing, you would typically never serve this tip to anyone unless maybe you're keeping it on and stuffing this. So we want to make sure we remove that. Again, we're not trying to break any bones. And we have our wings. One last thing, just like we did with the legs, we want to find that soft point of that bone on the tips of our airlines, and we'll take that off. Then, always as just a recommendation, go back through and look at the meat of the airlines, make sure there's no bone chips attached to anything or cartilage. Again, we want to make sure for our guests that they're getting a wonderful piece of meat that we're serving them. So. You're looking at your 6 cuts here, or 8 cuts, I'm sorry. You're looking at your 8 cuts here. Now, you can take this, of course, further and bone out the thighs, but this is really what we're looking for when we're breaking down a chicken.